Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started over here in the gallery. Welcome to the Assembled Playwright Exhibition Tour Redux, I'm calling it. This is our second time doing this, and the first time was at the Eugene O'Neill Symposium in October, and Harley and I enjoyed it so much we wanted to do it again, and also to record it, so thank you for being our audience. My name is Joel Miner, and I'm the curator of the exhibition. And with me today is Harley Hammerman, the collector of all of this here. And Harley and I are going to kind of walk down and talk about the exhibit section by section. And we'll have time at the end. If you have questions or comments, we'll be happy to answer them, either as a group or individually. And we'll go from there. Please feel free to sit if you get tired of standing. We have catalogs at the end, but also down here, and also refreshments. You probably saw bathrooms are right behind you, so feel free to move around as you like. And we'll get started. So as I said, this is the Assembled Playwright, and our first case here is about the collector. So we wanted to give the audience an idea of who the collector is behind the collection. And so we wanted to recreate as much as possible Harley's study and his desk and his den and where he assembled all this material. And how do you understand a collector? Maybe you go back to the beginning. What was the first thing they collected, right? How did they get into this subject to collect it? And in Harley's case, it was a sophomore English class at the University City High School. And his teacher was teaching the Emperor Jones, and Harley was hooked. And then later that year, he bought his first used book, Wilderness, at the St. Louis Book Fair. But we wanted to kind of get into a little bit about how the next 50 years went in Harley's collecting, how it changed from being a teenager, buying a used book, to buying all of this really one-of-a-kind, expensive things. So any comments on that?
Sure. Let me start. I want to thank everybody for being here too. Joel told me that we were going to do it again and record it, and I said, we need an audience. So thank you for being our audience. Also, before I forget, I want to thank Joel. I mean, this is spectacular the way he curated this. I mean, it was the first time I saw it, it was like, wow, it was beyond my expectations. So you'll see, it's really, really unbelievable. So in any event, yes. So that's how I started. I bought a first edition of Our Wilderness. Basically, I've always been a collector. I collected stamps, I collected coins, I collected rocks. So I thought, I'll collect books. So I got this first edition of Our Wilderness, and then I started looking for other first editions. And so every used, dirty, dusty bookstore in town, I would go in and go through the shelves and look for, I'd find it. If there was an O'Neill book, I'd go to the copyright page, and if it's the first edition, I'd buy it. And then my wife's here somewhere. Where is she? There she is in the red top there. We'd go out of town, and I'd drag her into every dirty, dusty bookstore that I could find, and she'd sit there while I climbed through the books trying to find first editions. But I quickly learned that if you really were going to be a collector, it was more than just collecting a first edition of a book. The idea was that book should look like the way it came, from the publisher. So condition was important. The book itself had to be in good condition. It had to have a dust jacket on it. If it came with a dust jacket, most of O'Neill's books did, and that dust jacket had to be in good condition. When you get beyond that, then you start looking for books that are signed by O'Neill. You start looking for books that are inscribed by O'Neill. You start looking for inscriptions to somebody important, like a member of his family or one of the actors in one of his plays. And then you look for inscription with good content. So not just like best wishes, Eugene O'Neill, but where he writes about something that is meaningful. So I started looking for all of that. Well, you didn't find those things in the, dusty bookstores that I was going into. There had to be other ways to get that. So I started, there was a weekly catalog that came out, A.B. Bookman, that I started getting every week. And I would find dealers that would offer their catalogs of American literature in there. So I would get them sending me those American literature catalogs. And if I found something interesting by O'Neill, I would order it. And once you start doing that, you don't have to do much else, because once the dealers figure out that you're interested, they start sending you catalogs. When they find out you're really interested, they start calling you on the phone. They start waking you up in the middle of the night. I mean, they were calling me, and they were really interested in me. I was, so at one point I'm competing with Joel. I'm competing with the universities to get things, but if Joel wants something, he has to requisition it and go through committees and this. I just wrote a check. So, they like me. So that's pretty much how it progressed.
Yeah, and so 50 some years later, we end up with a collection that's 110 linear feet long. So librarians like to measure things in linear feet, if you can imagine that. And 284 books, publications. These are the type of books that Harley was just talking about: mint condition, often inscribed, important association copies. 237 original documents, corrected typescripts, correspondence, other archival documents. 139 personal and professional photographs of O'Neill and family and others, and over 500 items from premiere productions and many other subsequent ones. So just to kind of give you an idea of the scope of it, by the time it reached us in 2018, it was, we were saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, the largest O'Neill collection in private hands at the time. So not insignificant collection at all. And I don't want to forget to mention the website. So we wanted to represent that here on the desk as well. Harley, did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I had this collection in my study, which is a little bigger than this, but it was in my study, and I was proud of it, but nobody knew about it. So the question was how to get people to know about it. So for my 50th birthday, which I'll date myself because that was in 1999, my children bought me a domain name. They bought me the domain name, and it was eoneil.com. And what I decided to do was to put my collection online. So I started by just cataloging it. I listed all the books, I listed all the letters, I listed all the manuscripts, I listed, and after I had them all listed, then I started going beyond that. So like the letters, okay, I would transcribe the letters. So not only did I say I had a letter from O'Neill to Robert Zisk, but I had the whole text of that letter. And I was told by dealers that I was crazy because I was diminishing the value of the letter because not everybody knew what was in it. And I didn't care. So I did that. Then I took the books, the plays that were in public domain, which were a lot of them, and I put the full text of those books online so that if a student wanted to read the book, they didn't have to buy the book. They just go online and they could read it online. I then went beyond that and put videos of O'Neill plays online. So if there was a production of O'Neill play somewhere, I'd say, did you video that? And can I put it online? I got to hold old television productions. There was a Hallmark Hall of Fame one way back when. I got a hold of that, a kinescope of that. So I had 20, 30 videos of O'Neill's plays in their entirety that you could watch. I had an audio archive where there were radio broadcasts of O'Neill's plays. We can talk about that a little later. Our recordings, LP recordings, I put that on. I had a study companion. I had what's called a production archive. It got to be as important to me as the collection itself, and it was used by students and scholars, all over the country and all over the world. So when we agreed that the collection was going to come here, I said, the website's a big part of that, and so we made sure that the website stayed intact.
And it's also true that researchers would use the archive when it was still in your hands, right? Even before the website. So it was becoming well known as an important collection. Right.
They would use it, and we had somebody come to the house once and use the collection, and Marlene wasn't fond of that. So we came up with a way where special collections here would let me bring. There was a woman who came from Yale. There was one of O'Neill's plays, Strange Interlude. Initially was banned in Boston. They didn't like the sexual content. So it played in Quincy, Illinois, and there was a special script for Quincy, Illinois. And she came from Yale here to write a thesis on the difference between the scripts. So I brought the scripts here, and they housed it here in special collections, and she would come here for a week and sit in special collections and take notes. So it worked out pretty well. So we had a thing going on, even before this happened.
So speaking of Yale, they came into the picture when Harley was ready to let go of his archive for an institution to take it over. And as I said, we got it in 2018, but we had come to look over to his house to look at it, and we're really impressed. Very extremely well organized, well preserved. But we knew we were going to have competition from Yale, for one. Yale has the largest institutional collection, and they have really since O'Neill was still living. And so we kind of thought it was probably out of our league. But Harley really wanted it to come here as an alum. I think that was maybe part of it. Also being in St. Louis, he could do things like this with us. It would be a bigger fish in the pond, perhaps. So we were able to work out a really great sale donation for the collection, which helped it come here. So now we are the owners of the largest private collection of O'Neill. So that's pretty exciting. A couple other things to point out here on Harley's desk. So of course we have O'Neill books up here just to kind of show you what they look like when they're on Harley's shelves in his office, and some of his archival documents here. And as I mentioned, they were very well preserved. And you can see here he had clamshell bookcases made by Richard Baker through the years. So very well preserved, well kept. And we also wanted to include some of his personal items and his collecting interest since O'Neill left his house, specifically the forgotten tables?
Lost tables. Lost tables.
Lost tables, sorry. Lost the word. So Harley, do you want to say anything more about other things here in the case?
So that's some of my, I write about old St. Louis restaurants on a website I call Lost Tables, so I have fun with that. And the little photograph there of the two little kids there, that's interesting. Those are my two grandsons who aren't so little anymore. They're now 11 and 15. But that drawing was done by O'Neill's granddaughter. So O'Neill had two children, Shane and Una, and Shane had four children, and one of them, Sheila, does wonderful drawings, and we got to be friends. And she, from a photograph, she did a drawing of my two grandsons, and so that's what that is there. That's on my desk at home usually, and I've got baseball paraphernalia and all kinds of fun stuff. Since all of my O'Neill stuff left my study, there's all kinds of other chasarai around. So.
And I also want to acknowledge Harley being so generous and gracious and hospitable. As I put this exhibit together, conceived it, he was open to me bouncing ideas off of him, proofreading, editing, and then also coming into his house again once more and taking stuff from his office. So it was another opportunity to really showcase.
These over here, these drawings here, there's a guy who lives he was originally an editorial cartoonist from New Zealand. His name is Mark Winter, and he now is a cartoonist in London, and he does drawings and gets people to inscribe those drawings to himself. And for some reason, I forget how we got hooked up, but he started drawing, if there was a play, an O'Neill play in London, he would do a drawing from it, and he would get them to inscribe it to me. So I have like 36 of them now, but so Joel stole 3 of them there, and let's see, I think we have, so one of them is inscribed by Jude Law, one of them by Glenda Jackson, one of them by Jeremy Irons. So he gets some pretty neat people to inscribe these drawings.